Most players think they know everything there is to know about itemization. So here's a quick question for the mage players out there. Let's say that as a mage, you base with this inventory and 2,400 gold. You were building towards a shadow flame, so right now you could finish it and pick up your tier 2 boots, or you could pivot your entire build and randomly get a death cap instead. What would you do? Most players know that Death Cap is an item that's far better in the later stages of the game, when you actually have more AP. So the Shadow Flame route would not only give you a bigger damage spike immediately, but also more mobility to boot. So it makes zero sense to complete Death Cap. And yet, many pro players in that exact situation will very often go the weaker route instead. Why? Well, in this video, we'll be answering that and a ton of other itemization concepts you've never heard of before. If you've ever had those games where it feels like you need 3 different items to begin dealing damage, but you also need a defensive one to survive the enemy assassin, or where it feels like you're dying to the enemy team when they just look in your direction. Or if you just want to know how to adapt your build properly every game, then this is the guide for you. The concepts we'll teach you today will give you a huge edge over everyone in your elo who don't even know how to apply a single one of these. So let's go back to our opening question to discuss our first concept. This is a shopping strategy a ton of high elo players use, but there's not really a word for it, so we'll call it future-proofing. The idea is simple. You're taking a slightly suboptimal purchase early on to make your shopping much simpler in the future. This is relevant for any game where you know for a fact you will need an item later on. While every other role can use this, it's especially common for the mage class. That's because a mage's damage will fall off significantly if they don't eventually buy a death cap and a penetration item. This isn't a mage exclusive strategy though. Like we mentioned, think about those games where it feels like you need so many items just to be functional. The enemy team is getting a ton of armor and becoming tanky, so you'd love an armor penetration item at some point, but they have so much CC on top of that, it feels like you need an Edge of Night just to play the game. And the Camille just keeps ulting you every fight too. Maybe a Guardian Angel would help. This is a problem you could have potentially solved before you even got into this situation. The way you do so is pretty simple. First, think about the game state and enemy compositions. It's important you think about the future, not just now. Do you think you'll likely need a ton of items to deal with the enemy team composition? If so, then proceed to step 2. What you want to do is identify a luxury transition item in your build path that you can skip. Examples of this are items like Shadow Flame and Horizon Focus for mages, Collector for ADCs, Opportunity and Ghost Blade for assassins, or Spear of Shojin for bruisers. As you can probably tell, these are items that you tend to buy second in your build that give you a good mid-game spike, but are ultimately not essential to your completed build. There's a reason these items are bought though. Some core items just aren't that good super early into the game. You wouldn't want to build stuff like Zanya's or Banshees, Lord Dominic's or Rapid Fire Cannon, or things like Cyrilda's Grudge or Serpent's Fang super early into the game. These are great items that tend to finish your build, but aren't great as a second item when you're still ramping up. However, transition items can lead you into the problems we've discussed. For example, imagine a mage that went Ludens into Horizon Focus. That's a good power spike, but the enemy team is starting to build quite a bit of magic resist. They also have a Fed Nocturne jungle who's one-shotting you, but you also need Death Cap to make sure your damage doesn't fall off. All 3 items are required to play properly, which makes the game feel miserable. Now imagine if that same mage had the foresight to realize this would be a problem. Instead of going Horizon Focus, they just went Crypt Bloom as their second item. They'd be slightly weaker at 2 items, but look how much cleaner their future itemization becomes. They only need 2 mandatory items now, which feels much more doable. Here's a quiz for the assassin players out there. Imagine you're a Talon versus this enemy team composition. Normally you might build something like Opportunity as your second item, but what should you consider building instead? If you notice, there's a ton of potential shields on the enemy team, both from their spells and future itemization. Going Serpent's Fang second might not feel great versus a Twisted Fate, but it'll allow Talon to adapt his build in the mid-game much more smoothly. Here's that exact situation in fact. In this game, the enemy Yuumi and Sivir dominated their lane. There's also a Yone and Diana who have shields in their kits. Serpent's Fang isn't an item Renekton wants to go early, but he's going to need it at some point. May as well get it now. You can see this come into play immediately. Notice that massive shield that Yuumi is providing, but Renekton has already solved the item issue, and is even starting to counter build as well. So he's got the perfect itemization to completely shut down this Sivir and Yuumi. They have to blow every single summoner just to stay alive, and it's all thanks to our future-proofing concept. For a final example, as an Aatrox, you might be wanting to build something like Shojin as your second item. But if your team is full AD, then you may want to take the momentary loss in power and just settle for Black Cleaver instead. This is a concept most roles can use fairly often, and should be something you consider in most of your games. Knowing how to adapt your items, and even your runes for the specific game you're in can give you a huge advantage. In fact, just blindly copying the same popular item and rune builds every match is one of the biggest mistakes low elo players make. The best players are constantly adapting their items and runes depending on the game they're in, which is exactly why you need to check out our brand new commentary page. There, you'll pick your chosen champion, your role, and even the exact matchup you struggle with, and learn precisely how top players carry in your elo, while also giving you advice on the most up-to-date, powerful, and situational item builds straight from the pros who are setting the meta, ensuring that you always know about the secret builds dominating a solo queue. But a perfect build is only as good as the player using it. That's why at Skillcapped, we work with some of the best players in the world who have hit Challenger multiple times across multiple regions to create fast-track courses designed to teach you all of the core fundamentals for your role. And it's this combination of fundamentals and overpowered builds that creates the ultimate recipe for climbing. And the best part, you can try all this out completely risk-free, since if you don't rank up while actively using Skillcapped, you get your money back, no questions asked. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below to get the rank you've always wanted and stay ahead of the competition. Moving on, we just explained how your second item can cause you a lot of problems if you're not thinking ahead. But there's another itemization moment that could be costing you a ton of power in every game. There's a unique strategy that Challenger players are using due to the two crucial changes Riot made to the boots system. First is obviously feats of strength. Having the option to upgrade your boots is a new addition you're all aware of. But that wasn't the only big change. If you recall, Riot also did a nerf on all the boots on top of that. They all got nerfed or their gold amounts changed because rushing tier 2 boots was too strong in the past. Now tier 2 boots are kind of mediocre, at least compared to before. This has led to an interesting development that Challenger players are taking advantage of, which we'll call boots juggling. It's important to note that the regular non-feats version of tier 2 boots can often be quite bad on your specific champion. For example, Sork boots got nerfed twice from 18 magic penetration to just 12. Most Challenger players agree that even mages don't really love building these anymore. They're far worse than they used to be, and if you ever watch competitive games, you'll rarely see mages build them. Instead, they'll go Lucidity or Merc Treads very often. But the feats of strength upgrade makes Sork boots a super strong choice again, at least when you've got the buff. Or another example would be defensive boots on carries. Have you ever been versus a Fed Assassin as a Kog'Maw and thought to build steel caps to try and survive? Then they just one-shot you anyway, right? But the upgraded defensive boots provide a ton of raw armor or magic resist, plus a hefty shield that actually makes you meaningfully tankier, even as a squishy carry. Which brings us to our strategy. Many Challenger players have started holding off on their boots purchases. Instead, they'll wait to see if their team will get feats of strength or not before deciding which boots to buy. So, for example, a champion like Zac can make really good use of the upgraded Lucidity boots, but if his team doesn't get feats of strength, he can just default to a tank option instead. Or as a mage, we discussed how Sork boots are quite mediocre these days, so you may want to default to Lucidity boots, but if you're going to get feats, you can go Sorks instead. Here's an actual in-game example. This Zed is versus 4 attack damage champions on the enemy team. Obviously, armor will be great to build this game, but as discussed, armor boots on a squishy character aren't going to help very much. He'd still get one shot anyway. So what Zed is doing is holding off on his boots upgrade and just building other items instead. If his team loses feats, he'll go Lucidity boots for more haste, but if his team wins the feats of strength, he can opt for armor boots instead because they're much more potent with the buff. You can see just how effective this strategy is. Zed was doing quite poorly this game, but this tip combined with the next one we'll cover is allowing him to outduel anyone who comes near him. He feels insanely tanky for being such a squishy champion, making him a pain for the enemy team to take down. Another note on this tip is that these 3 boots are absurdly overpowered right now. Merc Treads, Steel Caps, and Lucidity boots all get insane feats of strength upgrades and are definitely the strongest of the upgraded boots. The upgraded Merc Treads in particular can completely shut down burst mages, and they're definitely due for a nerf, which is why so many challengers are holding off on their boots purchases to see whether they can secure those upgrades. Here's a couple of extra tips to make the strategy even better. First is the fact that sitting on brown boots just waiting for feats can feel pretty bad. You move so slowly around the map, which might cause you to miss out on action. That's why more often than not, this strategy is used on champions that run the magical footwear rune. The extra bit of move speed they provide helps you move across the map a little faster. For example, a champion like Misfortune is a very popular example for this strategy. Because she's so naturally fast, she can sit on magic footwear and not feel too bad. Then if she wins feats, she can go for one of the overpowered defensive boots. And if she loses feats of strength, then she can just default to Swifties instead. Finally, as we mentioned, the tier 2 boots all got nerfed for the most part and aren't super exciting to build anymore if you didn't get the feats of strength buff. So if your champion or build happens to have a lot of movement speed naturally, then some players have started just sitting on tier 1 boots and not upgrading for a long time. For example, Poppy's team this game didn't win feats of strength, and pressing tab, there aren't any boots that are that great versus the enemy team, so she's opted to just sit on her basic ones and rely on movement speed from items instead. This is mostly a useful tactic for supports who buy Dead Man's Plate or junglers who have blue smite to help them get around the map faster. If you recall, we teased another tip in this fight that we saw from Zed earlier and discussed how there was another key itemization concept at play here, and that's our next tip: understanding EHP. Let's say that you have 1,000 health. If you take 50% less physical damage, then technically you'd have 2,000 effective health against physical damage, or EHP for short. Most players intuitively understand this, as it's not a super complicated concept, but there are some important details most players don't play around, which is why you're often squishier than you should be. First, we need to explain how armor and magic resist work. If you've ever bought armor or MR early on into the game, it seems like it's more effective. The percentage goes up way more early on, compared to if you buy it later on into the game, where you sometimes only get a 1% increase. But this is super misleading. All you need to know is that each point of armor and magic resist always makes you 1% tankier, no matter how much you already have. So if you have 100 MR, you're 100% tankier, so your EHP would double. And if you buy 200 MR, then you gain the same amount of EHP as the first 100. However, this does not mean you can just keep stacking resistances. Here's a quick test. See if you can get this right. Imagine you have 2,500 health and 200 armor already. Which would give you more EHP? Buying 1,000 more health or buying 100 more armor? Well, turns out that 1,000 more health turns into 500 more EHP. This is why becoming as tanky as possible is about balancing how much health you're buying versus how many resistances you have as well to maximize your EHP. That being said, this doesn't just apply to your items. You can use the same framework to maximize your EHP based on your champion's kit as well. Many champions have either a shield, a heal, or some sort of HP stacking mechanic in their kit. These types of characters tend to do very well when they buy resistances because you can consider their heals and shields as part of your health bar. Your heals on a champion like Silas and Swain become more effective the more armor and magic resist that you have, because they're technically healing for more. Shields follow a similar principle. If you've got an enchanter like Sona or Melio on your team, you can consider not building as much HP and instead focusing a bit more on resistances, because their shields will become more effective on you. But the opposite is also extremely important to understand. Remember how we mentioned that buying defensive boots is pointless as a carry? That's because you've already got a low health pool, so you're not gaining that much EHP by buying them. On the other hand, that's precisely why feats are so OP right now. They provide you extra resistances and a shield, giving you a ton of EHP, which can actually save you. The same reason regular defensive boots are bad on ADCs is true for health as well. If you watch high elo or competitive games, you'll notice that almost no ADC ever buys Immortal Shield Bow. It's a flawed item with a weird design. ADCs naturally have less resistances, so the shield isn't providing much EHP. You tend to just die through it, which is why no one buys it. As a quick note, we make sure ADC players never fall for bad itemization mistakes like that at skill cap. For every single ADC champion, we provide the best current build, so you always know what you should be prioritizing. And we make sure it's up to date every single patch, so you never have to worry about outdated information. So looking back at our previous Zed example, let's inspect his inventory. By using our juggling tip, he's secured a ton of resistances just from his boots. And he's also paired that with Eclipse and Black Cleaver, which are both extra sources of health and shields, giving him a ton of EHP. Zed is usually one of the squishiest champions in the game, but by combining the concepts we've discussed, he's impossible to kill now, despite how far behind he was this game. Make sure you remember this. Do not focus on just one type of defense. Resistances or health on their own won't make you much tankier, but combined, they will actually offer meaningful survivability. And the best way to do that right now is by utilizing our boots juggling tip. There's a reason we brought up Miss Fortune before. She tends to buy Bloodthirster in her build, which gives her lifesteal and a shield. So if you happen to get upgraded defensive boots by boot juggling, then your EHP will be insane. You can effectively just tank every skill shot from a mage and not care. Apply this same logic to whatever champion or role you're playing, and you will have a massive itemization advantage over everyone else in your games. Alright, that's gonna be a wrap on this one. Remember to sign up to Skill Cap to start climbing faster than everyone else today. See you next time.